The first time I called Ava Bennett my wife, I was standing beneath the ribs of a 100-year-old ferryboat with a champagne glass in one hand and a splinter in the other. A man from the State Preservation Board had spent 10 minutes asking Ava whether she was helping with the decorations. Ava had designed the entire restoration plan, negotiated the environmental permits, and somehow convinced 6 stubborn committees that turning the abandoned ferry Maribel into a floating public library was not a ridiculous idea. She had also been smiling politely for 9 of those 10 minutes, which was how I knew she was close to saying something devastatingly accurate. Before she could, the man turned to me and asked, "And how did you get involved?" I looked at Ava, at the pencil tucked into her hair, at the streak of blue paint on her wrist, and said, "My wife brought me into it." The words came out calm, natural, almost relieved. The man finally looked embarrassed. Ava did not. She leaned toward me until her shoulder brushed my arm and whispered, "I've been waiting for you to say that." Then she took my champagne, finished it in one swallow, and walked away before I could remember how breathing worked. My name is Caleb Mercer. I was 38 years old, a marine carpenter in Port Alder, Maine, and until that exact moment I had believed I was a practical man. Practical men did not confuse their oldest friend with their wife in front of donors, elected officials, and half the town. Practical men did not spend the next 40 minutes pretending to listen to speeches while replaying 7 words in their heads. Practical men certainly did not watch a woman cross a room and suddenly understand that every place she had stood for the last 20 years had felt more like home than the house where he slept. But there I was. The Maribel had been hauled onto dry supports behind my boatyard 6 months earlier. She was 112 feet of rusted steel, warped oak, and municipal regret. The town had owned her since the ferry service ended, which meant nobody had been responsible for maintaining her and everyone had been responsible for having an opinion about what should happen next. Ava had returned to Port Alder the previous spring after 14 years in Boston. The morning after she arrived, she asked me to meet her beside the abandoned ferry with my professional opinion and every intention of ignoring it. We had met when we were 9, after she climbed onto my father's workbench to prove she could use a hand plane and nearly removed the end of her thumb. From then on, our childhood became a collection of shared projects. Tree houses, school floats, a canoe that leaned permanently to the left. At 18, she left to study architecture. I stayed when my father's heart began failing and took over Mercer Marine before I was ready. We never stopped speaking, but distance allowed us to pretend closeness required no decisions. She sent photographs of cracked cornices and impossible staircases. I mailed her pieces of unusual wood with no explanation. Every Christmas she came home, and every January I drove her to the bus station without asking whether she wanted a reason to stay. When she returned for good, she told everyone Boston had become too expensive and too loud. I believed her because the explanation was practical. I did not ask what else had brought her back. "I want to save her," she said. Then she unrolled plans across the hood of my truck and showed me a reading room where the passenger cabin had been, workshop tables in the old vehicle bay, a children's corner beneath restored brass windows, and a small stage for lectures near the bow. It was beautiful. It was ambitious. It was financially irresponsible. That was how Ava and I had always worked. She imagined impossible things. I explained why they would fail. Then she asked enough questions that I started figuring out how they might succeed. By the night of the donor preview, we had replaced half the deck beams, stabilized the hull, cleared 2 inspections, survived a zoning hearing, and raised 70% of the money. Ava handled plans, grants, and public meetings. I handled wood, steel, and the volunteers who thought enthusiasm was a substitute for measuring twice. We were good together. Everyone knew it except us. Or maybe, as I began to understand after calling her my wife, everyone knew it including us. We had simply agreed never to say it in a way that required a response. Ava spent the rest of the preview avoiding me with professional precision. She greeted donors. She answered questions. She led a tour through the unfinished reading room and made 50 people believe they could already hear children turning pages where there was currently only a plywood floor and 3 exposed electrical conduits. The preview ended at 9. By 9:15, the boat was empty except for the 2 of us, the string lights, and the smell of sawdust mixed with salt air. The room was unfinished. Wind moved through gaps where windows would go. Beyond her, black water lifted and settled against the dock. She looked completely composed, but I knew her well enough to see the signs. Her left hand was wrapped around her right wrist. Her chin was raised half an inch too high. She was bracing for something. "I meant," she said carefully, "that I've spent a long time wondering what it would sound like if you ever stopped treating me like a temporary part of your life." I had expected embarrassment, maybe a joke. I had not expected an answer that reached backward through 2 decades and rearranged them. "You were gone 14 years, I said, because it was the first defense my mind found. "I came home for Christmas. I called, emailed. I sent you pictures of every terrible apartment I lived in. You built a life in Boston." "Yes." Her voice stayed quiet. "And every time something happened, good or bad, you were the first person I wanted to tell." The words settled between us. I looked at the rows of unfinished shelves we had built side by side. "Why didn't you say anything?" She gave a short laugh without humor. "I did. Not clearly enough, apparently. When I asked you to come to Boston after graduation. You had an internship. I asked you to come with me. I had my father and the yard. I know why you stayed. I'm not blaming you for staying." "Then what are you saying?" "I'm saying you heard the practical part of every conversation we ever had and ignored the rest. That landed because it was true." She picked up the pledge cards. "You asked what I meant. Now you know." "Wait." She stopped. "I'm trying to be honest," I said. "It felt true when I said it." Ava looked down at the cards in her hands. "And what does that mean tomorrow?" she asked. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. She nodded, not surprised. "That hurt more than disappointment would have." "That's what I thought." She walked toward the gangway. "Ava." She turned. "I need a minute." "No, Caleb." "You've had years of minutes." Her voice did not rise. "I'm not asking you to propose on an unfinished ferry. I'm asking whether I matter to you in a way that changes what you do next." I could have lied. I could have said yes because I wanted the tension to end. But Ava had never asked me for easy words. She had asked for actions I could stand behind. "I don't know what to do next," I admitted. "Then figure it out before you call me your wife again." She left. I stood alone beneath the string lights until they shut off on their timer and the ferry went dark around me. The next morning, Port Alder knew. By morning, a photograph from the preview was circulating through Port Alder, and half the town had accepted our marriage before either of us understood the sentence. The caption read, "Local boat builder and wife lead Maribel restoration." Ava arrived at 9:10, saw the post on my computer, and closed her eyes. "I can call the paper," I said. "And tell them what?" "That it was a mistake." She looked at me. "Was it?" I hated that I still had no answer ready. For the next 6 hours, we were exactly what we had been before the preview. Partners. Friends. 2 people who could argue about a ramp angle for 20 minutes and still hand each other tools without looking. But now every ordinary moment had a second meaning. At 3, my sister Ruth brought sandwiches, congratulated the happy couple, and escaped before I could throw her out. Ava laughed despite herself, and for a moment the new tension between us loosened. We ate at the workbench, shoulder to shoulder, while rain clouds gathered beyond the open doors. It should have felt ordinary. We had shared hundreds of meals like that. But once a truth is spoken, even badly, the old routine does not return unchanged. Her knee brushed mine beneath the bench. Neither of us apologized. She handed me the mustard without asking. I realized she knew I never used mayonnaise, knew which shoulder ached after long days, knew I counted screws twice when I was worried. I knew just as much about her. She sharpened pencils when angry, skipped lunch when frightened, and called every difficult decision interesting until she had chosen a side. 2 people do not gather that much knowledge by accident. We had built an intimacy and labeled it friendship because friendship did not force either of us to risk losing it. "Did you really ask me to move to Boston with you?" I asked. She stopped chewing. "Yes." I thought you meant for the summer. I found you a job at a restoration company. I thought that was because you knew I needed work. I found you an apartment listing. I thought you wanted help inspecting it." She stared at me. When Ava was 17, she had once called me the most intelligent idiot she knew. Her expression said the ranking had not changed. "I may have misunderstood," I said. "You think. Why didn't you correct me?" "Because your father was sick, and every time I mentioned Boston, you looked like I was asking you to abandon him." She folded the paper around her sandwich. "I loved you. I was not going to make you choose between me and your family." The workshop went silent except for the radio near the sanding bench. She had said loved. Past tense. Maybe because the past was safer. Maybe because it was accurate. I wanted to ask which one. Instead I said, "You could have told me." She gave me a tired look. "I am telling you now. The Thursday inspection should have been simple." By 7 that morning, I had rebuilt the disputed ramp section, painted the emergency lane, and installed signs large enough to guide a distracted moose. Ava arrived with the state inspector at 8. Warren Pike appeared 5 minutes later in a navy coat that had never been near honest work. The inspector measured every clearance and approved the access plan. I had just started breathing again when Warren pointed toward the lower hull. "While we're here," he said, "perhaps she should look at the lower hull repair." My stomach tightened. "What lower hull repair?" Ava asked. Warren pointed toward the steel plating beneath the old engine bay. "The one your surveyor missed." Warren slid his hands into his coat pockets. "Old boats are expensive. Sometimes the merciful thing is to stop pretending they can be saved." I stepped toward him. Ava caught my sleeve. "Not here," she murmured. Warren's smile widened. "Your wife has excellent judgment." The word was deliberate this time. A blade pushed into the place I had exposed. Ava released my sleeve. "She does," I said. "Which is why she said no when you asked her to put rental cottages where the public dock belongs." His smile disappeared. After the inspector paused approval pending a full hull survey, Warren left looking satisfied. Ava waited until his truck disappeared before turning to the exposed steel. Ava stared at the exposed steel. "If the plating has to be replaced, we're not talking about $10,000. "I know. How much?" "I don't know yet. Estimate. 60. Maybe 90. She closed her eyes. The bridge loan required the structural grant. The grant required inspection approval. Approval now required a repair we might not be able to afford. One hidden strip of rust had become the kind of problem that could sink a project without ever touching water. "I can cover some of it," Ava said. "With what?" She did not answer quickly enough. I looked at her. "Ava." "I increased the line on my house." The harbor seemed to go quiet. "You did what?" "My mother owned the house outright," she said. "The bank approved a $75,000 equity line in August. She had risked her home without telling me, just as I had hidden the suspected hull damage from her." I heard my voice getting harder and hated that I could not soften it. "You should have told me." "You're right." She nodded once. "I should have. Just like you should have told me the hull might need $90,000 before the donor event. I was waiting for facts. You were protecting me from information. I was trying not to panic you. I am not one of your apprentices, Caleb. I know that. Do you?" She stepped closer. "Because you introduced me as your wife when it felt good. But the moment something becomes frightening, you decide alone what I'm allowed to know. That isn't fair." "No." "It's accurate. After my mother left, my father had treated worry like an inheritance he could keep from reaching his children if he carried all of it himself. Bills disappeared into drawers. Doctor appointments became errands. By the time Ruth and I learned how sick he was, every choice had already been made. I had spent years resenting him for that. Then I had become him with better vocabulary." Ava looked at me for another moment, and some of the anger left her face. "I don't need you to save me," she said. "I need you to trust me with the truth." "I do trust you." "Then act like it." She walked toward the ferry. This time I did not ask her to wait. The survey came back Monday afternoon. The lower plating had to be replaced across 22 feet. The estimate was $118,000, not including the delay. We had $43,000 in contingency funds. Ava's credit line could cover $75,000, but using all of it would leave no reserve for overruns. The lender would hold the bridge loan for 30 days. After that, the project could lose both the lease and the grant. Warren's offer arrived by email during the meeting. He would purchase the Maribel and assume the outstanding project debt. He would reimburse private contributions, including Ava's line, and move the ferry to the East Harbor as a restaurant centerpiece. In exchange, the public library plan would end. Warren knew the exact amount of Ava's credit line because the board treasurer had shared our budget while hoping to secure a donation. Instead, Warren had used the information to price our surrender. The board divided immediately. Some members argued that a restaurant would preserve the ferry's appearance and erase the debt. Ava argued that saving the hull while abandoning its public purpose was not preservation. It was decoration. I watched people I respected choose between what the Maribel was and what she could become. The worst part was understanding both sides. A dead project helped no one. But accepting Warren's offer would hand him the waterfront, reward every obstruction he had created, and turn 6 months of community labor into a private attraction. When the meeting ended, Ava gathered her papers without looking at me. We had reached the stage where every financial decision was also a test of whether we could make choices together. Afterward, Ava and I walked toward the harbor. When I suggested the yard could cover the gap, she stopped beneath a street lamp. "Selling 4 generations of your family is not a funding strategy," she said. "Are you offering the yard because it is truly the best solution, or because another crisis lets you avoid deciding what you want when this project is over?" For the next week, we chased grants, donations, discounted steel, and volunteer labor. We cut the shortage to $51,000, but no further. Warren found me at the yard Friday afternoon and offered more than the property was worth, enough to repair the ferry, repay Ava's line, and relocate my equipment. In return, he would own the service road and the only dock large enough for future repairs. It was only permission for due diligence, not a sale contract, but I signed it and told myself I would show Ava in the morning. That evening, Ava arrived with soup and news of a possible $30,000 access grant. I should have shown her Warren's letter immediately. Instead, I waited for a better moment, which was the same habit wearing a different coat. She sat in my office describing the grant conditions while I felt the folded letter against my chest. Twice I reached toward it. Twice I convinced myself to let her finish. I told myself timing mattered. The truth was simpler. I wanted 1 more hour in which she still believed I had learned something from our argument. She studied me over her soup. "You're thinking loudly." "I'm eating." "You have never eaten soup with that much guilt." I almost laughed. I almost confessed. Then the power failed, and darkness gave me another excuse. When a transformer failed, we crossed through heavy rain to check the Maribel's temporary covers. Inside the dark passenger cabin, an emergency lantern painted the unfinished walls amber. Ava remembered riding the ferry with her mother. I remembered getting seasick on her white shoes. For a few minutes, the money and fear fell away, and we were children again on the same moving deck. She looked at me. "Is that what I am to you?" The question was quiet enough that I could have pretended not to understand. "No." "What am I?" I thought about the donor preview. My wife. The phrase had felt like a truth borrowed from the future. "You're the person I look for when I walk into a room," I said. "You're the call I answer even when I'm under a boat with both hands occupied. You're the reason I know what color the sky is in Boston in February, even though I've never lived there. You're the only person who can make me furious and hopeful in the same sentence." She did not move. "That's not a category," she said. "I know. It's not a decision either." "No." Her eyes lowered. "Then we're still in the same place." I stepped closer. "Not exactly. How is it different? Now I know I don't want a future where you are temporary." She looked up. For one moment, I thought she might close the distance between us. I wanted her to. I wanted it so clearly that it frightened me. Then her flashlight beam shifted past my shoulder and landed on the folded letter sticking out of my jacket pocket. Warren Pike's name was visible across the top. Ava's expression went still. "What is that?" I pulled it out. The truth, delayed by 6 hours, looked worse in my hand than it had on the workbench. He offered to buy the yard. And I signed permission for due diligence. She took the paper and read it under the lantern. "When were you going to tell me?" "Tonight. We have been together for 3 hours. I was waiting for the right moment."
No.
"You were waiting until you could present a finished sacrifice and call it a solution. That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" "An option. An option that gives Warren control of the access road and the service dock. We can negotiate easements. With the man trying to kill the project? I know the risks. You knew the risks of my credit line too, and you were furious that I kept it from you. I signed a letter. I did not sell anything. You made the first move towards selling your life without including me." The word life struck harder than yard. Rain hammered the roof. "I'm trying to keep this project alive," I said. "And I am trying to understand whether you know how to build a life with someone instead of building emergencies around them. That's not fair. Stop saying that when you mean painful." Her voice finally rose. "You called me your wife. Do you know what that word means to me? It does not mean you get to stand beside me at a fundraiser and then disappear inside yourself whenever a decision costs something. I am here. Your body is here. Your decisions are always somewhere I can't reach until you've already made them." I had no answer because the letter in her hand was the answer. She folded it once and gave it back. "I'm going home. Ava, it's pouring. I would rather walk in the rain than spend another minute being protected from my own life." She left before I could stop her. The next morning, Ava stayed away. For 3 days, we communicated through professional emails while Warren's unsigned purchase contract sat on my desk like proof that delay was still a decision. Ruth found the contract Tuesday. She reminded me that our father had hidden bills and medical news because he believed carrying fear alone protected us. I had resented him for making love impossible to reach, then repeated the same pattern with Ava. Ruth stood. "Ava is presenting at the town hearing tonight." "What hearing?" "The emergency lease amendment." I opened the proposal on my phone. Ava had redesigned the project as a community cooperative. 100 founding memberships, annual local shares, voting rights for residents and trade volunteers, and a 10-year public access guarantee. My yard would become a paid maintenance partner, not collateral. A municipal easement would protect the service lane from Warren or any future owner. She had solved the funding gap by refusing the premise that one person had to rescue everything. At the bottom, she had written, "We are not preserving an object. We are creating a place the community can carry together." I read the sentence twice. Then I tore Warren's contract in half, called Ruth back from the doorway, and asked her to drive because my hands were shaking too badly. The town hall was full by 6. Ava presented a community cooperative funded through 100 local memberships, a public access grant, and a permanent service easement. It raised the missing money without selling either of our homes and prevented any one person from controlling the ferry. During public comment, Warren attacked the plan and announced that I was negotiating to sell the yard. Every face turned toward me, including Ava's. I walked to the front carrying the torn contract. "I was negotiating," I said, "because I believed the only useful thing I could offer was something I was willing to lose." The room went quiet. I looked at Ava. I was wrong. Warren shifted in his chair. I held up the pieces. "The yard is not for sale. I will sign a 10-year maintenance agreement with the cooperative at the rate listed in the proposal. I will also place a permanent access easement on the service lane, so no future owner can block the Maribel from repair access." Ava stared at me. The mayor asked, "Have you reviewed the maintenance terms?" Yes. That was not entirely true. I had reviewed them in Ruth's truck while she drove too fast toward town hall. But the numbers were fair, and for once I knew the meaning mattered more than my ability to control every detail. Warren stood. "You are making a permanent property decision based on a relationship that does not legally exist." There it was again. "Wife." not wife. The gap between a word and a life. I faced him. No, I said. I'm making it based on a community plan designed by the best preservation architect I know. My personal failure to recognize what Ava means to me does not make her work less sound. A murmur moved through the room. Ava's eyes did not leave mine. I continued before fear could turn me practical again. She asked me whether she matters in a way that changes what I do next. This is part of my answer. Not all of it. The rest belongs to her, not this room. For once, Port Alder respected a boundary. The vote passed 7-2. By noon the next day, every founding membership was sold. The grant was confirmed, and donated labor closed the remaining gap. The Maribel was going to survive. After the hall emptied, I found Ava stacking papers near the podium. I apologized without defending myself and told her I had rejected Warren's offer. But I knew one correct decision could not repair every hidden one. You should have told me before you signed anything, she said. I should have. And you should not confuse a public speech with private change. I won't. She aligned the corners of the papers, buying herself time. You keep proving love by giving things up. The yard, sleep, money, any part of yourself that can be turned into a sacrifice. It's the language I learned. It is not the only language. I nodded. Then teach me the one you need. No, her answer was immediate. Learn it with me. I am not another project you finish correctly. That distinction mattered. She was not asking for rescue, improvement, or a heroic gesture. She was asking me to remain present while neither of us knew the outcome. I learned to treat love as carrying the heaviest thing in the room alone, I said. My father loved us that way. It made him dependable and impossible to reach. I don't want to love you from a place you can't reach. Ava warned me that one public gesture did not make her a reward for my late emotional education. She needed consistency, not promises of perfection. I stepped closer, but not too close. I can promise to ask instead of decide, I said. I can tell you bad news before I fix it, and I can stop calling silence protection. If we try this, you will not be temporary. Ava looked down at the papers, then set them on a chair. And what exactly are we trying? It would have been easy to hide behind a joke. I had done that once already. A real relationship, I said. Dinner that is actually a date. Plans that include both of us because we discussed them, not because I assumed. Arguments where neither person walks away with a secret mortgage or a property contract. Very specific. We have useful data. She studied me with the same concentration she gave damaged buildings, seeing not only what stood in front of her but what repairs it would require. I have loved you for a long time, she said. That does not mean I trust this version of you yet. That's fair. I need consistency. I can do consistency. You say that like it's carpentry. It might help if I think of it that way. She laughed softly. Then she stepped forward and rested her forehead against my chest. I did not move at first. The gesture felt more intimate than a kiss because Ava never leaned on anything she had not tested. Slowly, I put my arms around her. This is not a verdict, she murmured. What is it? Permission to present more evidence. I can work with that. Our first date happened 2 nights later at a diner 30 miles away, beyond Port Alder's line of sight. We were awkward for 10 minutes and honest for 3 hours. I held the door too formally. She asked whether I intended to pull out her chair. I said the gesture lacked structural purpose. She called it the least romantic sentence ever spoken in a restaurant, then smiled in a way that made the waitress smile too. For the first time, we talked about the years apart without reducing them to schedules and obligations. She told me about the engagement she had ended because the man loved only the version of her that fit inside his plans. I admitted I had kept relationships shallow because needing anyone felt like volunteering for loss. We did not solve each other. We listened. At the end of the night, in the diner parking lot under a broken sign, Ava kissed me. It was not dramatic. No rain, no music, no audience. She placed one hand on my coat and gave me enough time to step back. I did not. When she moved away, I said, I've been waiting for you to do that. "Do not steal my lines," she said, and kissed me again. The months that followed were work. We still hit uncertainty sometimes, still argued, and still had to choose our way back into the same room. Each return made trust less theoretical. Meanwhile, new steel replaced the corroded plates, volunteers built shelves, and children painted tiles for the reading corner. By spring, the Maribel was back in the water. On the morning she returned to the harbor, Ava and I stood on the dock before anyone else arrived. The restored ferry moved against her lines with a quiet, living weight. Ava slipped her hand into mine and admitted she had been afraid the project would consume everything between us. I told her I had been afraid finishing it would remove the reason she stayed. She squeezed my hand and said, "Then it is a good thing I am staying for reasons that can walk off this dock." That was the first time I believed our future did not depend on another emergency. On opening day, a reporter asked how I was connected to the project. Ava heard from the stairs as I answered, "Maintenance partner, founding member, and Ava Bennett's boyfriend, provided she hasn't revised the terms." She took my hand and said the terms remained under annual review. A year after the donor preview, I took Ava onto the Maribel after closing. The library lights glowed through restored brass windows, and the children's room held abandoned bookmarks from another busy day. We had spent that year practicing ordinary honesty. I told her when the yard lost a major contract before I had a replacement. She told me when she applied for a preservation fellowship in Vermont before she knew whether she wanted it. We still failed sometimes. The difference was that our failures no longer became locked rooms. I had planned a speech for that night, but standing beneath the archway where she had once found Warren's letter in my pocket, polished words felt like another hiding place. So I gave her the truth. "I used to think marriage was one big promise," I said. "Something you either had the courage to make or didn't. Now I think it is hundreds of small decisions. Telling you the bad news before I fix it. Asking what you need instead of deciding for you. Letting your plans change mine without treating that as a loss. Coming back after an argument. Making room for both of us." I took a small box from my pocket. "For the record, Ruth has seen the ring, the insurance papers, and a written statement confirming that I have not sold, mortgaged, or secretly promised any real estate." Ava laughed and covered her mouth. The ring was a narrow band of brass recovered from the Maribel's original wheelhouse, set around a sapphire the color of deep harbor water. "Ava Bennett," I said, "will you marry me?" Not because I said the word once and liked how it sounded. Because I know what it asks of me now and I want the asking. Every day. She looked from the ring to me. "You consulted Ruth?" "Extensively. The cooperative conflict policy? Updated. Financial disclosure? Prepared." Her eyes filled. "You are ruining this with competence. I can become less competent if it helps. Please don't." She held out her hand. "Yes." We married the following June on the Maribel's upper deck, surrounded by cooperative members, family, and children who already treated the ferry as their own. Just before we walked onto the deck, Ava stood beside me in the old wheelhouse. "You're nervous," she said. "I'm aware of the stakes. Any last-minute diagnostic concerns?" "None." She adjusted my tie. I looked down at her hands. No blue paint this time. No grant forms. No hidden contracts. Just the brass ring on her finger and the steady touch of the woman who had never asked me to become fearless. She had asked me to become reachable. Outside, the mayor called for us. Ava started toward the door, but I caught her hand. "There's something I want to say before everyone else hears it." She turned back. I smiled. "You're my wife." Her expression softened into the smile I had been too slow to understand when we were young and too afraid to deserve when she came home. "I've been waiting for you to say that," she whispered. This time I knew exactly what came next. I opened the wheelhouse door and we walked out together. The Maribel rocked gently beneath us, no longer abandoned, no longer carried by one person's plan or another person's sacrifice. She belonged to everyone who had chosen to keep her afloat. Ava squeezed my hand as we stepped into the sunlight. For most of my life, I thought love was proven by how much weight a person could carry alone. I was wrong. Love was not carrying the whole structure. It was telling the truth about where it was weak, handing someone the other end of the beam, and trusting them to lift with you. That was the life Ava had been waiting for me to name. And once I finally did, I spent every day learning how to mean it. Have you ever said something by accident that revealed what you truly wanted? Share your story in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe for more love stories about the moments that change everything.